The path the prince almost didn't take. His life was mapped before he could walk. Every expectation drawn, every milestone predetermined, every choice shaped by the weight of a lineage older than the cities that now gleam across the desert. Yet destiny, as he would learn, is not always a straight line, and the path he was born to follow nearly vanished the moment he discovered a truth that threatened to change everything. To understand why this turning point matters today, we must step into the world of a young prince caught between duty and identity. Titles may offer privilege, but they also carry invisible chains. Chains forged from tradition, obligation, and the hopes of an entire nation. From the outside, his life seemed effortless, but inside, he felt the pressure of a future he never had the chance to choose. As a boy, he excelled in every discipline expected of him: diplomacy, strategy, history, and the traditions that shaped his royal heritage. Elders praised his discipline. Advisors admired his promise. His father saw in him the continuation of a legacy that had survived wars, alliances, and centuries of change. Yet behind every accomplishment, he felt a quiet unease, the sense that he was walking a path drawn by others. The first spark of conflict appeared when he traveled abroad for his education. For the first time, he lived away from the palace's structure, surrounded by people who knew nothing of his title. There he discovered something unexpected. He was free to be curious, to explore interests outside the narrow expectations of royalty. He took classes in fields no one at home valued, fields that ignited a passion he had never felt. He began to imagine a life shaped not by obligation, but by choice. But choices, he would soon learn, carry consequences. During one late-night conversation with a professor he admired, the prince confided his growing desire to carve his own path. The professor listened, then asked a question that altered the rhythm of his thoughts. If your destiny were entirely your own, who would you become? The question lingered in his mind long after the conversation ended. For the first time, he dared to envision a life beyond the palace gates, beyond the weight of national expectation. And as that vision grew stronger, the path he had always known began to feel less like heritage and more like confinement. But destiny, once questioned, does not stay silent. And soon, forces from home would rise to remind him that some paths are not abandoned without a price. Word of his shifting interests reached home long before he returned. At first, the messages from advisors were subtle, gentle reminders of his responsibilities, polite inquiries about his studies, encouragement to remain aligned with the family's vision. But beneath their calm tone, he sensed a growing concern. They feared his newfound independence might weaken the carefully constructed future awaiting him. When he finally stepped back into the palace, he felt the shift immediately. Conversations felt rehearsed. Smiles lingered just a moment too long. Elders asked questions that sounded innocent but probed too deeply. His father watched him closely, not with suspicion, but with a quiet worry he had never seen before. He tried to resume his expected role, attending council meetings, reviewing diplomatic proposals, participating in ceremonial duties. But something within him resisted. The passion he had discovered abroad kept pulling at him, whispering that the world was larger than the throne he was destined to inherit. And for the first time in his life, obligation felt like a cage. The conflict sharpened when he requested permission to pursue a long-term project unrelated to royal governance, an initiative focused on scientific development, inspired by the studies he had fallen in love with. To him, it was a chance to merge personal passion with national progress. To the palace, it was a warning sign. His father summoned him for a private conversation. The room was quiet, the air heavy with expectation. The king listened patiently as his son explained the project, the vision, the purpose. But when he finished, his father offered only a single sentence. A prince does not choose his path. He prepares to carry one. The words struck him harder than any reprimand. They were not cruel. They were not angry. They were simply true. True to the world he came from. The world shaped by generations who believed duty was the ultimate expression of honor. But he struggled. Nights grew longer. His thoughts became tangled between loyalty and self-discovery. The more he tried to push down his desires, the more they surfaced in unexpected moments, brief flashes of a life free from inherited expectation. Then came an unexpected turn. A foreign delegation requested his direct involvement in a diplomatic negotiation. He assumed it was routine, but soon realized they had specifically requested him. Not for his title, but for his insight, his education, his unique perspective shaped by experiences beyond the palace walls. For the first time, he saw a bridge between the life he wanted and the life he was expected to lead. Yet, that opportunity carried a hidden complication. Some within the palace resented the praise he received from foreign leaders. They feared his modern thinking would disrupt traditional order. Quietly, they began maneuvering to limit his influence, reshaping his schedule, redirecting his responsibilities, and attempting to push him back into a narrow role. He felt the walls closing in. The prince who once saw two potential paths now sensed one of them being quietly erased. And unless he made a choice soon, the decision would be made for him by those who believed they knew what destiny should look like. The pressure was rising, and the path he longed to choose was slipping further out of reach with every passing day. The breaking point emerged slowly, concealed within a series of small decisions that tightened around him like threads of an invisible net. Meetings he once led were reassigned without explanation. Projects he had initiated were quietly postponed. Invitations that once arrived daily now came with conditions, or did not come at all. No single act was overtly hostile, yet each one nudged him back toward the narrow role others had decided he must fulfill. He felt himself fading from the spaces where his voice had once mattered. And in that quiet shift, he recognized the truth he had been avoiding. The palace was not afraid he would fail. It was afraid he would redefine success. The tension grew sharper when he learned that the scientific initiative he had proposed had been reassigned to another department, one less equipped to carry it forward, one certain to let it die slowly under bureaucratic weight. The message was unmistakable. His passion was distraction, and distractions had no place in the lineage he represented. Anger flickered within him for the first time, not because they dismissed his ideas, but because they denied his right to become something beyond the title he inherited. Yet anger offered no solution, and so he sought clarity where he had always found it, in solitude. Late one evening, he slipped out into the palace gardens, wandering beneath palm trees, swaying in the warm breeze. It was here, in the quiet sanctuary his mother once brought him to as a child, that he confronted the conflict tearing him in two. He longed for a purpose shaped by curiosity, not obligation. But he could not ignore the truth. His people expected a prince, not a scientist. And the throne, once a symbol of pride, now overshadowed every glimpse of the life he wanted to build. The turning point came unexpectedly. As he walked, he overheard two junior diplomats discussing the upcoming negotiation he had been asked to join. They spoke with admiration, noting how his perspective, unique, global, untraditional, had already shifted the tone of the dialogue. They had no idea he was listening. And in their unfiltered words, he heard something he had forgotten: value. Not as a symbol, not as a title, as a mind. That realization pierced the fog around him. He saw that destiny was not always a cage. Sometimes it was a platform waiting for a new kind of leadership. Maybe he did not need to choose between the two paths he carried within him. Maybe he was meant to build a third. But the palace was not finished testing him. A confidential report soon surfaced warning that foreign partners were becoming too reliant on him, a phrasing meant to spark doubt among the elders. It implied he was being influenced rather than offering influence. It cast his strengths as vulnerabilities, and though the report was subtle, its impact was immediate. Doors that had begun to open were suddenly guarded again. He realized then that the resistance he faced was not merely about tradition. It was about fear. Fear of change, fear of new ideas, fear of a prince who might reshape the very structure they had spent decades perfecting. The pressure tightened further when a group of senior advisors confronted him quietly, suggesting he step back from international affairs for his own clarity. Their tone was gentle, their concern rehearsed, but their true intent was unmistakable. They wanted him contained. The prince stood at a crossroads once more. Only now, the decision before him was far sharper than the one he faced while studying abroad. If he remained silent, his path would be chosen for him. If he pushed back, he would spark a conflict powerful enough to alter not just his future, but the kingdom's. And beneath the weight of this moment, he understood something profound. A path chosen for him would never be one he could truly walk. The A moment of defiance or surrender was approaching, and whatever he chose next would define the prince he became and the ruler he might one day be. He called for a meeting, not with advisors, not with diplomats, but with his father. The king greeted him with calm dignity, unaware that this conversation would mark the turning point of his son's life. They sat facing one another in a room lined with portraits of ancestors, men who had carried empires on their shoulders. Their silent gazes seemed to watch as the prince gathered the courage he had been shaping for months. He spoke with honesty, not rebellion. He explained the quiet suffocation he felt, the narrowing of his world, the dismissal of his ideas before they had the chance to breathe. He described the passion he had discovered abroad, the desire to contribute to the future not just through tradition, but through innovation. And he confessed the fear that had followed him home, the fear that he would never be allowed to become the man he was capable of being. His father listened in complete silence, absorbing every word. When the prince finished, the king remained still for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, with a voice softened by years of carrying the weight of the nation, he revealed a truth the prince never expected. He had seen the changes. He had heard the whispers. He knew his son was being contained, but he also knew why. Tradition had been built on the belief that stability came from repetition. But the king, despite his stoic nature, understood that a ruler who could not evolve with the world would one day be left behind by it. The climax came when the king rose, walked to a window, and spoke the words that reshaped everything. A prince who follows only the path he is given is a symbol, but a prince who chooses his path becomes a leader. The prince felt something shift inside him, not permission, not approval, but recognition. His father did not wish to confine him. He wished to protect him until he was ready to rise beyond the expectations placed upon him. What followed was unexpected. The king granted him full authority to pursue the scientific initiative he had envisioned. He instructed the palace to remove the barriers placed around him, and he named his son the lead representative in the upcoming international negotiations, not because he was the heir, but because he had earned it. In the days that followed, the palace reacted with quiet shock. Some advisors resisted the new dynamic, others embraced it, but all were forced to confront a truth they had long ignored. The prince was no longer a figurehead shaped by tradition. He was a rising force guided by insight, conviction, and a vision that extended beyond the palace walls. He returned to the gardens one evening, standing beneath the same palms that had witnessed his doubt. Only now, he felt the horizon widen in front of him. The two paths he once believed he had to choose between had merged into something new, something uniquely his. He understood then that the path he almost didn't take was, in fact, the path he was always meant to walk. One shaped not by expectation, but by courage. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future.